When you look at the NAPE conference, I was shocked to how much the discussion was focused on renewable energy. I'm talking everybody's talking about how we can transition to renewable energy. Everyone's talking about how to manage CO2 more effectively. Everyone's talking about how natural gas is a cleaner form of energy and how we need to transition from our nation's perspective there. We also talked about developing nations versus undeveloped nations and how our energy usage is very different. Over half the world has still not had a sufficient infrastructure for even the basic amount of energy. So when I say half the world is dark, I want you to think about the continent of Africa, where many of them right now, because they don't have the infrastructure for electricity, they're not able to cook food in their homes the way that we do here. They're not able to cool or refrigerate medicine. They're not able to take advantage of all the technologies here that we take for granted on a daily basis. So from our perspective, when we look at ESG, we're looking at it from a perspective of we want our life, we want to be responsible citizens. When these developing nations look at this type of governance, their demand for energy is still increasing. Their infrastructure has been recently built or is still being built, and that means that their type of energy they're going to be using is going to look very different than the energy that America uses over the next few years. Now, we don't know what's going to be more efficient than gas. We don't know that. And I'm not saying that these oil and gas companies are saying we're just flat out transitioning. I'm telling you that it's being very carefully studied. That's very clear from this. And depending on who you ask, there's a lot of attention that's put on it. Now, on the flip side, the demand for oil has still shown it's going to be there in a big way. So I've heard estimates here at NAPE that said they expect oil to be as high as 125 over the next 2 or 3 years. And they're saying that because even though the demand for ESG governance, and that's that climate change guidelines, even though that demand has increased, we have not had an equal amount of infrastructure buildup. In other words, take you at your home right now. You may have a desire to reduce emissions for your family, maybe for the community. But what measures have you actually taken to lower your carbon footprint? That's a good example. And if you were the average American, the truth is we haven't done much to do that. Some of you may have an electric car. That may be a small measure. Some of you may have some solar panels. But by and large, if you look at the percentage of the population, it's very, very small. So due to that fact, the demand for oil dropped primarily because of COVID. That was the big demand drop cause. Now that we're seeing a comeback, it's very interesting to see that the demand for oil has come back accordingly. So it's very possible. On the low end, people are saying 70, 80 bucks per barrel. On the high end, I'm hearing 125. All that sounds good for the industry as a whole. Now, one thing I'll tell you from listening to the speakers today, I don't expect continued expansion in the way of office space. I'm not hearing more space. I'm not hearing more assets, especially developing natural gas or oil and gas. A lot of the bigger companies are transitioning their assets. BP is a great example. I spoke on that, and I'll probably post a video about it on LinkedIn. But BP is a great example of trying to offload much of their refining assets. Even though that's not a large percentage of their business, I think they're trying to get ahead of the curve, because we see a lot of these bigger companies are going to attempt to shed those assets that hurt their ESG requirements. In other words, that hurt their ability to meet climate change requirements. They're going to pass that off to companies that are not publicly traded, most likely, or companies that are international, so they can take on those assets and they'll be able to run that business as the Exxons and Chevrons of the world continue to evolve and look at how are we going to be good global partners? How are we going to continue to lead the way in providing energy to the world? Oil is going to always be part of that picture in my mind for a very long time, but I think there's going to be other parts as well that we're going to be looking at.